The city of Troas rested along the edge of the sea like a threshold between worlds. Its harbors opened toward distant coasts, and its streets carried the marks of countless travelers who had passed through, leaving behind fragments of language, custom, and belief. Stone buildings rose in tiers along the slope, their windows catching the sea wind, their roofs darkened by years of sun and salt. Troas was not the largest of cities, yet it held a quiet importance, a meeting place for roads and routes that bound provinces together. In such places, ideas traveled as readily as ships, and new faiths often found their first listeners. Long before that night, Troas had already brushed against the unfolding work of the gospel. It was here that Paul had once seen a vision in the night, a man of Macedonia calling for help, urging him to cross the sea and bring the message westward. Acts 16:8-10. That earlier moment had marked a turning of direction, a widening of the path. Now Paul had returned again, not driven by vision, but by resolve, carrying with him the weight of years spent proclaiming Christ amid resistance and hope. Each journey had left its mark upon him, and each assembly he visited bore traces of struggle and growth. Paul arrived in Troas during a season of urgency. He was moving steadily toward Jerusalem, aware that suffering awaited him there, though its exact form remained hidden. He spoke openly of this burden, acknowledging that he was bound in spirit, compelled to go forward despite the warnings that came to him in every city. Acts 20:22-23. Yet urgency did not make him careless. When he reached Troas, he remained there 7 days, choosing not to pass through without strengthening those who believed. The believers in Troas formed a small but devoted community. They gathered quietly, often in homes or upper rooms, places removed from the noise of the street. Their faith set them apart, not by outward sign, but by shared commitment. They broke bread together, prayed together, and listened intently. Paul's presence stirred anticipation. They knew his teaching carried both clarity and cost, shaped by persecution, travel, and unyielding conviction. When the first day of the week arrived, the community assembled to break bread together. The meeting took place in an upper chamber, lifted above the street. Its windows opened wide to invite the evening air. Lamps were placed throughout the room, their flames flickering against the walls, casting long shadows that moved as people shifted their weight. The gathering was crowded not only with people, but with expectation. Word had spread that Paul intended to depart the next day, and the knowledge lent the night a sense of finality, as though each moment carried added weight. Acts 22:7-8. Paul began to speak, and his words unfolded steadily, unhurried, yet intent. He spoke as one who understood both the promise of the message and the fragility of those who carried it. He reminded them of the path of Christ, of suffering endured and glory revealed through obedience. He urged them to remain steadfast, to guard the truth entrusted to them, and to care for one another with humility and courage. His teaching did not rest on ornamented speech, but on depth shaped by lived experience. As the hours passed, the night grew heavier. The lamps burned steadily, filling the room with warmth and smoke. The air thickened, and the simple act of listening required effort. Yet no one wished to interrupt Paul or ask him to shorten his words. Each sentence felt like a final gift, a portion of wisdom offered before separation. The listeners leaned forward, determined to absorb what they could before dawn arrived. Among those gathered was a young man named Eutychus. He found a place near one of the open windows, where the breeze provided relief from the crowded room. From there, he could hear Paul's voice and feel the rhythm of the teaching as it carried through the space. Eutychus was young, his strength still bound to the limits of the body, his endurance untested by years of hardship. As the night deepened, weariness settled upon him quietly, unnoticed at first, then pressing more heavily with each passing hour. Acts 22:9. Paul continued speaking, his voice steady even as midnight approached. The message moved from encouragement to warning, from memory to expectation. He spoke of faith tested by trial, of communities threatened by false teaching, and of the responsibility borne by those who had heard the truth. The words demanded attention, not only of the mind but of the heart. For many in the room, the effort to remain awake was an act of devotion. In the window, the struggle within Eutychus reached its limit. Sleep overcame him fully, heavier than he could resist. In a moment that unfolded without warning, his body slipped from its place, and he fell from the third story to the ground below. The sound of the fall shattered the stillness of the gathering. Paul's words stopped abruptly, and the room erupted in cries and movement. Fear surged through the assembly as they rushed toward the stairs, their lamps swinging wildly, scattering light across the walls. Acts 22:9. They reached the street and found Eutychus lying motionless. The life that had animated him moments before was gone. Shock settled over the group, followed quickly by grief. The weight of death pressed upon them, stark and undeniable. What had begun as a night of instruction now stood on the edge of despair. For a moment, the promise spoken within the room seemed distant, overshadowed by the finality before them. Paul descended with them, his pace urgent, but his bearing composed. He did not recoil from the sight, nor did he speak words of alarm. Instead, he went directly to the young man and embraced him, pressing his body against the still form. In a voice marked by assurance, he told the others not to be troubled, declaring that life was in him still. Acts 22:10. His action echoed earlier moments in the history of God's people, when servants of the Lord had called life back into lifeless bodies through prayer and obedience. The change came swiftly. Breath returned to Eutychus, and life stirred again where silence had reigned. The watchers stood in stunned disbelief as the young man revived before them. Grief gave way to awe, and fear loosened its grip. The crowd that had gathered in despair now lifted Eutychus alive, their hearts overwhelmed with relief and wonder. The night had turned, and death had been compelled to release its hold. Acts 20:12. They returned together to the upper room, carrying with them the weight of what had occurred. The lamps still burned, though lower now, and the air carried a new tension, charged with meaning. Paul resumed the gathering, breaking bread with them and sharing in fellowship. The act was simple, yet it resonated deeply in light of what they had witnessed. Life restored had transformed the meaning of every word spoken thereafter. The conversation continued until daybreak. The hours that followed were no longer marked by weariness, but by reflection. Paul spoke further, drawing connections between the hope they professed and the power they had seen. The fall of Eutychus had become part of the night's instruction, a living testimony woven into the teaching itself. Faith, once discussed in words alone, had been embodied before their eyes. Acts 20:11. As dawn approached, the lamps flickered and dimmed. The first light crept through the windows, softening the shadows that had filled the room. Outside, the city of Troas stirred, unaware of the events that had unfolded above its streets. Paul prepared to depart, his journey pressing forward once more toward Jerusalem. The believers watched him go with strengthened resolve, their hearts anchored by what they had witnessed during the long night. Eutychus walked among them, alive and whole. He was no longer only a listener who had struggled against sleep. He had become a witness to the power at work within the community. His fall, once a moment of weakness, now stood as a sign remembered and retold. Through him, the assembly carried a story that spoke of restoration where loss had seemed certain. The memory of that night did not fade quickly. It traveled with the believers as they gathered again in upper rooms and quiet homes. They spoke of the teaching that stretched through the night and of the moment when death itself had been overturned. The stories shaped their understanding of faith, reminding them that weakness and grace often meet in unexpected ways. Troas remained a city of passage, its harbors busy and its streets filled with strangers. Yet within its history, the long night endured as a quiet landmark. It testified that the message carried by Paul was not confined to words alone. It reached into exhaustion, fear, and loss, and there revealed a power greater than human strength. As the sea winds continued to move through the city and ships came and went, the memory lingered. The long night stood as a reminder that faith often unfolds in fragile moments, and that restoration can come when hope seems to have slipped away. The gathering ended, the lamps were extinguished, and the journey continued, yet the meaning of that night pressed forward with them, shaping the days that followed and anchoring their trust in the power of life that had been revealed before dawn. And so the night passed into memory, not as a moment of loss, but as a turning point where life was affirmed, and the journey of faith pressed onward toward the unknown days ahead. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell. More Bible figures await.